Welcome to KidMissing TV. This is our 10th episode. So this time we're going to do Missing 10-Year-Olds in honor of our 10th episode. I'd like to start out with an update from episode 5, Missing in Groups or Pairs. There has been a major break in the case of the Lyons sisters, Sheila and Catherine. Before I start, I want to take you back to episode 5 and have you listen to the case so that you're brought up to speed. This next case is another pair of sisters who disappeared in a similar time frame. They disappeared March 25th, 1975. And they have somewhat of a timeline. Their names are Catherine and Sheila Lyon. Lyon. Catherine was 10 and Sheila was 12. The girls left their home around between 11 a.m. and noon on that day to go to a strip mall in their hometown of Wheaton, Maryland. And they were seen about 1 p.m. outside the Orange Bowl Pizzeria in the strip mall, talking to an unidentified man who later got the moniker Tape Recorder Man, because this man had a briefcase with a tape recorder in it. This was an old-fashioned tape recorder. If you're old enough, you might know what I'm talking about. They have reel-to-reels, little reels that the tape rolls from one reel onto the other reel, just like a movie projector type thing, only it's an audio recorder. And that's the kind of recorder that was described that the man had, which kind of makes sense in 1975 because there were a lot of those still around then. The girls were seen walking one of the most direct routes back from the mall toward their home between 2:30 and 3 p.m. Now, this man would have had to waited an hour and a half to do something, and waited until they were walking home. I don't think Tape Recorder Man's the abductor. Little strange maybe, but not the abductor. Their mother set a 4 p.m. curfew. They did not arrive. By 7 p.m. she was in a panic and called police. On April 7th, about 2 weeks later, a woman in Manassas, Virginia, said that she saw a car with Maryland plates, with the plate bent up so you couldn't see all the numbers, with 2 girls bound in the back of it that looked like Catherine and Sheila. Nothing ever came of the lead. It's possible she really saw Catherine and Sheila. Don't know. Virginia's not that far from Maryland. The police were never able to get anywhere. The plate numbers were DMT-6, and again, the other 2 numbers were obscured due to the bending of the plate. Police have identified a second suspect in the case, Richard Welch Sr., the uncle of the first suspect, Lloyd Welch. He was a security guard at Wheaton Plaza at the time. They are currently searching on Taylor's Mountain in Bedford County, Virginia, for the remains of the girls. The sheriff believes that they will find the remains. They are also looking to help identify a late 1960s, early 1970s vintage station wagon, potentially associated with the case. As you heard when we just showed you the case, there was a woman who identified possibly seeing the girls in this type of vehicle. And there wasn't any more description of it than that. A radio station, WMAL, intends to honor its commitment to a $7,000 reward, which leads to the discovery of the girls, Sheila 12 and Catherine 10, when they disappeared. They've been bought and sold, this radio station, several times, but they still maintain wanting to do this. It's very important to them. Also, as of January 12th of this year, they are continuing their search with FBI ERT, that's Evidence Response Teams. At the site. News is breaking every single day on this. So as soon as they find something, whether it's the next episode or the episode after that, I will make sure to bring it to you. I've been checking it, like I said, because it's happening day by day at this point. It would be a wonderful thing if, after 40 years, we could give their family some answers. If you have any information in this case, you can call the Wheaton, Maryland Police Department at 540-586-7827. Michaela Joy Garrett disappeared from Hayward, California. Hayward is in the San Francisco Bay Area, for those unfamiliar with the area and the case. On November 19, 1988, Michaela was abducted from a convenience store in front of a friend. Here is first clip that I'm going to play for you from my show, where I had the privilege of talking to Michaela's mother, Sharon Murch. We've also become friends over the past year and a half since that interview, where she talks about seeing Michaela for the very last time.
Well, it was the first day of Thanksgiving break, a Saturday morning. It was November 19th, but it was really a warm day here in Northern California. And Michaela and her best friend had spent the morning going back and forth to each other's houses and trying to dress up as similar to each other as they could and fixing their hair and everything. And then Michaela came to me and asked if they could go to the neighborhood market to get some candy and sodas. And at first I said no. I didn't like I was a very overprotective mother. I didn't like for my kids to travel away from home. It was only 2 blocks, but it was, you had to turn the corner and go out of sight. And she begged and begged and begged and told me that her friend's dad had given them $5 to go to the market. And so finally I kind of scanned in my mind the route to the market looking for any danger that I was feeling, and the only thing I could think of was, maybe some of the teenage boys in the neighborhood would give them a bad time or something, but they were going to be riding scooters, so I figured they could, get away from anybody who tried to bother them pretty quickly. So finally I gave in and said yes. And Michaela was really excited. She bounced up and down and said, thank you, Mom. And when they left, I went to the door and watched them pick their scooters up from the driveway to leave. And as she was leaving, Michaela turned around and said to me, I love you, Mom. And I said, I love you too, Michaela. And those were the last words we spoke to each other.
Again, Michaela was taken in front of her friend. They had left the convenience store and initially forgot that they had brought their scooters. They walked back to grab their scooters. One of them was gone. Michaela saw it in the parking lot between 2 parked cars. She went to pick it up, and a blonde man grabbed her. You will see a color version of his sketch right now as her mother talks about the abduction itself. Please take a listen.
And saw that one of the scooters was missing. It wasn't by the door where they'd left it. They looked around and Michaela spotted it first. It was in the parking lot, about 4 parking spaces away from the door, next to a car, and she went to get it. And as she bent over to pick it up, the man jumped out of the car, grabbed her from behind, threw her screaming into his car, and took off with her. And that is the last we have seen of her.
The car the man was driving was described to police as a large, older model, American-made sedan, gold or tan in color. Keep in mind, a traumatized 10-year-old girl made this description. The man was described as being 18 to 24 years old. Again, you'll see the sketch both when I showed you the second clip, and you'll also see the sketch on the poster for Michaela. In 2012, Wesley Shermantine, part of an infamous crime duo dubbed the Speed Freak Killers, because they were on speed when they committed their crimes, said that his partner, Lorne Herzog, was responsible for Michaela's abduction. He also offered to lead police to several bodies, which didn't happen. This is not necessarily a good lead. They were suspects at one time, but I'm not sure the police buy this at this point. They will pursue it, but they're not counting their chickens. There was also a sighting of Michaela, which may be a legitimate sighting because it is believed that she may have been trafficked, that she may in fact still be alive. There's very good reason that they're not stating out loud in public, because they want to protect their investigation and potentially the child, who would now be grown. But one of the places that there was a sighting was the UAE, which stands for United Arab Emirates. And Sharon believes that this sighting could be legitimate, based on information that she has that we don't have. If you would like to know more about Michaela and her story, you can go to Sharon's website, Missing Michaela. That's MICHAELA, or Dear Michaela, both .com. If you have any information, you can call the Hayward Police Department at 1-510-293-7272. Lonnie Boudreau disappeared from Vanier, Ontario, Canada, on February 5th, 1981. Again, he was 10 years old. Unfortunately, there's very little information in this case. We know that the night before, Lonnie had jumped out his bedroom window and was found within a couple of hours by police. Lonnie's parents were separated, and he desperately wanted to get them back together. He was despondent over the separation, as many 10-year-olds are, when this happens. How did he elude police the second time around when he crawled out the basement window? Nobody actually knows. I suspect that there was foul play that happened after he left the home. We've got to figure out what kind of foul play and who. That's really all that is known about this case, unfortunately. Again, it was February 5th, 1981. If you have any information on this case, please call 1-613-236-1222 and reference case number OCC 85-43918. That's the Ottawa Police Service. Kevin Collins disappeared from San Francisco, California on February 10th, 1984. He disappeared a little before Michaela did. There were several children that disappeared from the Bay Area, several little girls during the time that Michaela did, and he disappeared just before. I don't think the cases are connected, but it's an interesting note that there's been several kidnappings in that area. He left early from basketball practice to go home. Normally his brother would have walked with him. His brother was 12, but his brother was sick that day, so he walked to the bus alone. He was waiting for the number 43 bus. That was the last time he was seen talking to a tall, blonde-haired man. The fact the last time this child was seen, he was talking to an adult, is creepy. In 2005, an identity thief stole Kevin's identity, thinking nobody would realize that he had done it because it'd been so long nobody would pay attention to it. But luckily the person who took the information realized who Kevin was and alerted authorities. There is a person of interest named Dan Terrian who unfortunately died in 2008. He lived a couple of blocks from where Kevin was last seen in 1984. Complicating matters is also the fact that the guy used 5 aliases: Raymond William Stewart, Kelly Lee Dawson, Wayne Jackson, which was the alias he was using at the time of the abduction, Kelly Sean Stewart, and Dan Leonard Terrian, which he was using when he died. Since they said it that way, I'm going to say that they probably don't know for sure exactly who the guy was. The police said, quote, "What we are looking for now is anybody that saw the guy in 84, talked to the guy in 84, talked to somebody who talked to him in 84. Detective Sir said, "We would love to find the whereabouts of this little boy." On January 29th of last year, the SFPD, FBI, and Alameda County Sheriff's Office excavated the home where Terrian lived and found bones, but they were believed to be animal remains. They said they wouldn't have the results for several weeks. Well, since it's been 2 years, I think it's safe to say they were animal bones. If you have any information in the case of Kevin Collins, you can call the San Francisco Police Department's Major Case Unit at 1-415-553-1145. Mary Ann Verdecchia disappeared from Bloomfield, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb of Pittsburgh, June 7th, 1962. She was 10 years old. Mary Ann came home from school. She went to Immaculate Conception private Catholic school, I'd say. And they had a half day that day. She came home. She changed out of her uniform and went to the Martinique Apartments because she used to help an elderly woman there, go shopping for her and things like that. The woman gave her a list. She went shopping. She was last seen going back into the apartment building. I don't think she ever left that building. It would be interesting if they would say whether she ever went back to the woman, ever made it back to the woman's apartment with the goods that she went for. Miss Therese Rocco is a retired detective who used to work on the case, who still, in her spare time, works on the case. In 2012, her hope was renewed because City Detective William Flesky worked to have DNA from 2 of Mary Ann's closest surviving relatives entered into NamUs, which is, for those who are not familiar, it's a database where if you're missing or unidentified, your remains are unidentified, they put DNA, dentals, whatever they have, pictures of you in this, and all the vital information, and they try to figure out who you are or where you are. It's fairly new. It's only been around about, if I had to guess, 6 years. You can go to their website. But, of course, this edition has yielded few leads or we wouldn't be here. Marianne had been living with her aunt and her cousins on Morwood Avenue. Her mother ran off with a railroad porter, and her father disappeared after they separated. Her half-brother did grow up with their mother, and he said it was a nightmare for her and ate away at her. And she wanted him to become law enforcement someday and look for her. Well, today he is Sergeant Linnane, and his curiosity about his sister's case did not end with his mother's death in 1983. He periodically combs the internet for news stories about his half-sister, and finally, at the urging of a cousin, called Ms. Rocco. He had no idea, of course, that she was still so passionate. He came to Pittsburgh to walk the ground, visiting the site of the since-demolished Martinique Apartments. He said it felt spooky to be there. He wished someone would come forward. He maintains contact with Ms. Rocco, who continues to offer city detectives bits of information she gleans. She says they have an eye on this case, and I am never stopping. In my opinion, as I said, she most likely never left that building. I think police today, and this is the genealogist in me, but should take old voter registration lists or old street listings, find out who lived in that building, if any of them had a record, talk to them if they're still alive, and get GPR, which stands for ground penetrating radar, and cadaver dogs, and get back there and search the grounds where that building used to be, because I do believe that that's exactly where she is. If you have any information in the case of Marianne Verdecchia, please call 1-412-323-7800. James Richard Howell disappeared on May 28, 1969. Some say the 27th. I'll explain that. From Sterling, Illinois. He was just about 10 years old. It's been said that he disappeared the day before and he wasn't reported until the next day, so that became the date of the disappearance. But there's been a lot of confusing and conflicting things said about this case. Weren't his parents home? Weren't his parents home? His family had been through a lot. When his parents divorced until his mother remarried, the kids were shuffled from the orphanage to foster care, all sorts of things. So it was rough. But he was still obviously a compassionate little boy, because he found an injured pigeon on the day of his disappearance, brought it home. He was seen walking with it under his arm, in fact. And he wanted to build a cage for it to let it heal. And his sister said, well, let me go in the house and get the hammer and some nails and I'll help you out. Because he had an armful of boards and an armful of pigeon. And when she came out, the boards were spread all over the place and he was gone. There were searches including mounted patrols, several surrounding police departments, Boy Scouts. Police went to Missouri to check with relatives there. They also went to Des Moines, Iowa, where James was to visit his brother starting the next day. And found nothing. By the way, mounted patrol means on horseback, for those who are not familiar with the terminology. In 1975, after Deborah was grown and married, she didn't have a phone at the time. She was living in a different part of the city, and her neighbor said, when your brothers called, said he'd be in town about 3. And he never came, and Deborah asked both of her other brothers, Steve and John, if they had called. They said they hadn't. Was this real? Was this a hoax? Was James trying to get a hold of his family? For years, Deborah followed up with the sheriff's department. She brought in family photos to help make an age progression that you see on the poster. She submitted DNA, should they ever find a body. Detective Pat Carney with Whiteside County said, Sharon Hutch described her son as a boy who would not run away from home without any preparation. She also said how James was afraid of the dark, that he was hyperactive and under medication to keep him calm. Doesn't sound like a kid who would run away either. If you have any information on this case, you can call 1-815-772-4044, and that is the Whiteside County Sheriff's Office, or the Sterling, Illinois Police Department at 815-626-2131. This is more of a history lesson than a case per se, because I kind of already know what happened in this case, but it's something that I've read about, read a whole book about actually, and saw the movie. You may have also seen the movie. The Wineville Chicken Coop Murders from the late 1920s. Wineville, California, which is now Mira Loma, California. They changed their name November 1st, 1930, to separate themselves from the horrible crimes that happened there. Walter Collins disappeared on March 10th, 1928. If that name sounds familiar, that's because the movie Changeling was about him and about his mother, Christine Collins, played by Angelina Jolie, directed by Clint Eastwood. She gave him some money that day to go to the movies because she was called into work that day as a telephone operator and couldn't go with him. LA was very different then. You could do that. I don't think a mother would do that today in LA. But there was another disappearance. Nelson and Louis Winslow, 10 and 12-year-olds, went missing on their way home to Pomona on May 16, 1928. That's just a couple of months later. And their parents received some pretty odd letters from them saying, we're going to stay away as long as we can so we can be famous. We're going to Mexico. All sorts of weird things. The police didn't connect these disappearances. They didn't connect the headless body of a Mexican boy that they found in the La Puente either, even though they were later proved to be all connected with one another. And they didn't feel that a neighbor's complaint about a boy being mistreated at the chicken farm was worth doing anything about either. They didn't feel it was relevant. In August of 1928, Illinois police picked up a boy that they thought was Walter Collins, brought him back. He wasn't. His mother proved it by handwriting, dental records. Of course, this was after she got thrown in the state hospital, which police could do back then just to get you out of their hair, basically, as it was explained in the movie. There's also a book that I read called The Road Out of Hell, The True Story of the Wineville Chicken Coop Murders. It was by Anthony Flacco, with a foreword by Sanford Clark's son, Jerry Clark. Sanford Clark was the abused boy. In September, a Canadian woman named Winifred Clark contacted U.S. authorities to tell them that her nephew had kidnapped and was holding her son, Sanford Wesley Clark, in California. She would never have done that on her own. Her daughter, Jessie Clark, who went to see her brother and found how abused he was, told her to do that. Because the mother gave her son to him. Mother hated her son. If you read the book, you will learn this. The movie was more just about Walter. It didn't go into the rest of the stuff that I'm going into about Sanford. So, this is all stuff you have to read the book to learn. The uncle was Gordon Stewart Northcott. Northcott was 21, and the little boy was 15. He was brutally, physically, and sexually abusive to the boy. Brutally raped him on a regular basis, beat him beyond belief. And it was learned on September 15th from Stanford that his uncle had kidnapped him, had physically and sexually abused him, and that he had forced him to watch the abuse and murders of Walter Collins, the Winslow brothers, and other boys. Sometimes he even made him participate in these acts. Northcott abducted boys to rape them in the beginning, and he would take them back into Los Angeles and drop them off. Later on, it became killing them. He poured quicklime over their bodies to speeds the decomposition process. Northcott's father, Cyrus George Northcott, told police that his son had admitted the murders to him. Cyrus Northcott had nothing to do with it. He didn't have a clue about it until all heck broke loose, and his son didn't have a choice but to tell him. His wife, however, was involved in the murders. She participated. This poor guy had something coming. A rude awakening. Northcott and his mother, Louise, had left town. The LAPD initially continued to insist that Christine Collins had her son. They only discontinued this belief when a handwriting expert, as I mentioned before, said that it wasn't him because the R's that the boy used, were R's that were only taught in Illinois. This I found interesting because I didn't realize they taught different handwriting styles in different parts of the country. On September 20th, Gordon Stewart Northcott was finally arrested in British Columbia. They arrested his mother, Sarah Louise, called Louise, Northcott, in Alberta in December. The police took Northcott back to the ranch in an attempt to get more information, and he verbally confessed to 5 murders, including the Winslow brothers, Walter Collins, and a Mexican boy named Alvin Gothia. However, later that day, Northcott only admitted 1 homicide in a written confession, and that was the murder of Alvin Gothia. On February 8th, 1929, an all-male jury found Gordon Stewart Northcott guilty of first-degree murder of the Winslow brothers and an anonymous victim. Judge George R. Freeman sentenced him to the death penalty. Although he was convicted and sentenced to death, the families of his victims didn't have closure due to the inability to find intact bodies. Northcott was hanged October 2nd, 1930. The horrors of the Wineville chicken coop murders, as I mentioned, were introduced to the world again in 2008 in Clint Eastwood's The Changeling. During the murder investigation, police searched the 3 graves that Sanford Clark had identified to authorities and discovered 51 parts of human anatomy. Those silent bits of evidence of human bones and blood have spoken and corroborated the testimony of living witnesses. While Walter Collins' whole body had never been found, it was this partial body evidence that allowed authorities in the state of California to conclude Walter Collins had been murdered, coupled with Sanford Clark's testimony at the sentencing hearing of Sarah Louise Northcott. While partial body parts have been collected at Walter's grave, they were never introduced as evidence because they did not feel that they needed this evidence. Sarah Louise Northcott was convicted. Actually, she confessed to the murder of Walter Collins. She was spared the death penalty. Christine Collins continued to search for her son right up until her own death. Never believed that he had died. In fact, in the movie, they made it sound like at some point some kids escaped. I never read a thing about that in the book, so I'm not sure where that information might have stemmed from. But the state of California has no doubt that Gordon Stewart Northcott, Sarah Louise Northcott, and Sanford Clark, unwillingly, participated in the murders of the Winslow brothers and Walter Collins. And Walter Collins was indeed dead. In 1935, there was a boy who, along with his parents, spoke to authorities and told them he had been abused by Gordon Stewart Northcott. And this boy was initially thought to have been murdered in the chicken coop. But, of course, he showed up alive. Authorities believe that Gordon Stewart Northcott and or his mother may have killed as many as 20 boys at Wineville. But this can't be confirmed at this point. Thank you for listening to that little interesting bit of history. There's an old saying, if we don't remember the past, we're doomed to repeat it. So I like to throw in stories like that I just find interesting, heartbreaking, and horrifying all at the same time. I wish that they had more remains. If it was today, they could have done DNA and figured out who the remains were. I don't even know if they can do that with what they have now, or if they even know where what they have is. Thank you for joining us. Don't know when you're watching this, but tomorrow we're having a terrible snowstorm. Be safe. God bless you. Have a great evening, and thank you for watching this our 10th episode.